Good evening and welcome to the Sunday edition of Poland Daily. I'm Conrad Gorlinski. Let's take a look at this evening's headlines. Well, as of today, a new package of sanctions against Russia goes into effect. An embargo on Russian oil and a price cap. The sanctions are new, but the questions are old and the same as always. How much will this realistically weaken Russia's budget, and won't it ricochet back on us? Will prices rise, and won't we run out of oil and gasoline at the stations? The U.S. Treasury Minister, of course, reassures that the cap will be particularly beneficial to low and middle-income countries, which have already borne the brunt of energy and food price hikes rising due to Putin's war. The embargo covers petroleum products such as diesel fuel. Previously, a price cap was also imposed on this commodity. In general, the share of Russia in fuel imports to Europe was not some huge one. It was only 12%. And when it comes to Russia's perspective from fuel exports, it was 60 to 70% for Russia. Here, Russia may suffer more, and that's the point. Experts from the Polish Chamber of Liquid Fuels assure that diesel prices are not expected to rise after the embargo on fuel from Russia. At present, there are no grounds to expect serious market disturbances or sharp price increases in the coming weeks. The industry is taking measures on an ongoing basis to increase the country's energy security. As a result, there will be no shortage of fuels in Poland. Also, there should be no fear that the fuel may run out. The government assures that Polish companies have reserves of diesel fuel. We have the ability to secure Poland for all our fuel consumers. Sanctions imposed by the West on Russia are expected to limit the Kremlin's ability to finance spending related to aggression against Ukraine. The sanctions are working, although Russia is defending itself quite cannily. There are countries, various companies, for whom business is business, and they bypass sanctions. Sealing these sanctions and imposing more is making things worse for Russia. The fact that we're cutting Russia off from its markets is a very good thing. This will accelerate the end of this war. Russia should be economically isolated, politically isolated, and isolated in sports as well. The EU embargo on imports of Russian finished fuels is the next one, after the embargo on Russian oil, which was introduced on December 5th, 2022. These are very good embargoes because Russia has less and less money, just very much overdue. If they had entered 6 months ago, Russia would probably have had to end this war for lack of funds. Also, last December, representatives of the G7, the European Union, and Australia jointly capped the price of Russian oil at $60 per barrel. Well, the Russians don't just loot, rape, torture, and murder civilians. They burn books from Ukrainian libraries in boiler rooms and trade and sell kidnapped children for porn films. This is what Ukrainian Ombudsman for Human Rights Dmytro Lubinets spoke about this week. And on Friday in Vienna, U.S. Ambassador to the OSCE, Michael Carpenter, relayed that more than 14,000 children have been kidnapped and taken deep into Russia since the war began.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has stripped Ukrainian citizenship from former officials of the Putin-supporting government of Viktor Yanukovych, who now support the Kremlin and have Russian citizenship. Today, I signed the relevant documents to take another step in defending and cleansing our country of those who are on the side of the aggressor. I did so at the request of the security service regarding those who are registered as having Russian citizenship. Russians have shelled the city center of Kharkiv with missiles from S-300 systems. There have been 60 shellings in the Kharkiv region alone in the past 24 hours. Apartment buildings and university buildings were damaged. We didn't even understand what was happening. We didn't even look at what time it was. In short, there was a strong explosion. It was one short moment and everything happened. We were saved by the furniture that fell on us, and thanks to this, we are now alive. My friend is here with me. She was taken away by an ambulance. She was injured by shards of glass, but overall, we are fine. We're taking what we can and evacuating. Canadian tanks arrived in Poland today that will go to Ukraine. At the same time, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is lobbying for equipment donated by the West to be used exclusively for defensive operations. Together with our allies, we are transferring tanks to Ukraine so that it can defend itself. We have carefully considered every arms delivery, coordinated closely with our allies, above all the U.S. This joint approach prevents the escalation of the war. The support of Western countries has not only supplied equipment and humanitarian aid, but also training. In Poland, Ukrainians are learning to operate Leopard tanks. Meanwhile, in Spain, there is a special training to adapt soldiers to war conditions. I feel great. The first days were tough, of course, but now I feel much better. I got used to the level of pressure. It's easier now, as I am physically more prepared. The training they are receiving during these 5 weeks is a basic training to enable them to move, fight, and survive in a conflict zone, increasing the Ukrainians' combat capability and chances of survival. The Russians have been using exactly the same criminal methods for centuries. In the near future, they intend to deport Ukrainian children from illegally annexed territories to the northeast, to Karelia. To date, the Russians have abducted several 100,000 children. 3, 2, 1.
And Pakistan's former president, Pervez Musharraf, died today following a prolonged illness at a hospital in Dubai. After years in self-imposed exile, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, President Arif Alvi, and the chiefs of Pakistan's Army, Navy, and Air Force each expressed condolences on his death. A special flight will be sent to Dubai on Monday to bring Musharraf's body back to Pakistan for burial. Pakistan's military and the country's mission in the United Arab Emirates announced the death of the former army chief, 79, who was pushed from power back in 2008. Pervez Musharraf, the four-star general who ruled Pakistan for nearly a decade after seizing power in a bloodless coup in 1999, oversaw rapid economic growth and attempted to usher in socially liberal values in the conservative Muslim country. Musharraf died in hospital after a long illness, after spending years in self-imposed exile. He enjoyed strong support for many years. His greatest threats were al-Qaeda and other militant Islamists who tried to kill him at least 3 times. But his heavy-handed use of the military to quell dissent, as well as his continued backing of the United States in its fight against al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban, ultimately led to his downfall. Born in New Delhi in 1943, Musharraf was 4 years old when his parents joined the mass exodus by Muslims to the newly created state of Pakistan. His father served in the foreign ministry, while his mother was a teacher, and the family subscribed to a moderate, tolerant brand of Islam. In his early years in government, Musharraf won plaudits internationally for his reformist efforts of pushing through legislation to protect the rights of women and allowing private news channels to operate for the first time. His penchant for cigars and imported whiskey, and his calls for Muslims to adopt a lifestyle of enlightened moderation increased his appeal in the West in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States. In a 2006 memoir, however, he took credit for saving Pakistan from American wrath, saying the country had been warned it needed to be prepared to be bombed back to the Stone Age if it did not ally itself with Washington. In other areas of foreign policy, Musharraf attempted to normalize relations between New Delhi and Islamabad. Under Musharraf, foreign investment flourished, and Pakistan saw annual economic growth of as much as 7.5%, which remains the highest level in nearly 3 decades, according to the World Bank data. The later years of his presidency were, however, overshadowed by his increasingly authoritarian rule. In 2006, Musharraf ordered military action that killed a tribal head from the province of Balochistan, laying the foundations of an armed insurgency that rages to this day. The next year, more than 100 students calling for the imposition of Sharia law were killed after Musharraf shunned negotiations and ordered troops to storm a mosque in Islamabad. That led to the birth of a new militant group, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has since killed tens of thousands in suicide bombings and brazen assaults. Later, in 2007, a suicide attack that assassinated opposition leader Benazir Bhutto triggered waves of violence. His efforts to strong-arm the judiciary also led to protests, and a besieged Musharraf postponed elections and declared a state of emergency. In 2008, the country's first democratic elections in 11 years were held. Musharraf's party lost and faced impeachment by parliament. He resigned the presidency and fled to London. He returned to Pakistan in 2013 to run for a seat in parliament, but he was immediately disqualified. He was allowed to leave for Dubai in 2016. In 2019, a court sentenced him to death in absentia for the 2007 imposition of emergency rule, but the verdict was later overturned. However, people interviewed by Reuters in Karachi and Islamabad today had positive views of the former ruler. During his tenure, Pakistan was economically quite strong. There was employment in Pakistan. The poor people were employed, and essential items were cheap and affordable. He, on the other hand, was the one who governed very well. May Allah give him peace. That is all I can say.
What a great man dies with Musharraf. I mourn his death.
And finally, yesterday, a U.S. military fighter jet finally shot down the suspected Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina, a week after it first entered U.S. airspace and triggered a dramatic and very public spying saga that has further worsened relations between China and the U.S.
President Joe Biden said he had issued an order on Wednesday, February 1st, to take down the balloon, but the Pentagon had recommended waiting until it could be done over open water to safeguard civilians from debris crashing to Earth from thousands of meters above commercial air traffic.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was when we got over water outside within 12-mile limit. They successfully took it down, and I want to compliment our aviators who did it, and we'll have more to report on this a little later. Thank you.
The balloon was shot down about 6 nautical miles off the U.S. coast of the Atlantic Ocean over relatively shallow water, potentially aiding efforts to recover elements of the Chinese surveillance equipment over the coming days, U.S. officials said. One U.S. military official said the debris field was spread out over 7 miles or 11 kilometers of ocean, and multiple U.S. military vessels were on site. The downing of the balloon came shortly after the U.S. government ordered a halt to flights in and out of 3 airports in South Carolina, Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, and Charleston, due to what it said at the time was an undisclosed national security effort. Flights resumed on Saturday afternoon.
Gosh, it was almost like a moving cloud coming down. And then the smoke was gone, and it just started slowly going down, but further out towards the ocean. Yeah. But it was a great experience. You should have shot it down when it first been seen in California instead of letting it travel all the way across the United States. Yeah. That was just stupid, in my opinion.
I think it's terrible that they let it get this far to start with. And what I've heard, there's more and more of them. So how many did the Chinese actually put out? And what's exactly on it? Is it just devices to check, I don't know, our airspace, our military movement and everything? So it's scary. I mean, it's a different way of spying on us, let's put it that way. And why would it be here? Why do they worry about our weather and not theirs?
China strongly condemned the military strike on an airship that it says was used for meteorological and other scientific purposes, and which it said had strayed into U.S. airspace completely accidentally, claims flatly dismissed by U.S. officials. While Saturday's shoot-down concludes the military dimension to the spying saga, Biden is likely to continue to face intense political scrutiny from Republican opponents in Congress, who argue he failed to act quickly enough.
Well, as usual, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Please stay with us for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and other programs. But from me, it's have a wonderful week ahead.